They didn't expect you to leave. Not really. Because in their mind, you were the one who always came back. You were the one who tried harder, loved deeper, waited longer. They built their safety around your effort, your persistence, your emotional presence. And when you started pulling it back, not out of spite, but out of survival, something in them panicked. They didn't show it. They never do. But inside, it felt like the ground shifted. Because for the first time, the dynamic they relied on started to fall apart. They'd spent so long telling themselves they didn't need you, convincing themselves that distance meant strength, that love meant control, and control meant safety. But when you finally stopped chasing, when you began to choose yourself, it broke the pattern they thought they could always count on. At first, they may have told themselves they were relieved. They said things like, I need space anyway, or it's better this way. But that's the story the avoidant always tells. When they feel something too deeply, they disguise pain as peace, loss as freedom, because admitting otherwise would mean facing the truth. That connection was never their enemy. It was their craving. They didn't want to lose you. They just didn't know how to have you. They spent so long confusing closeness with danger that your absence felt like safety until it didn't. The moment you turned inward, the moment your energy shifted, they felt it. You began pouring that same love you once gave them back into yourself. You stopped explaining your worth, stopped performing for their affection, stopped begging to be understood. And that's when something strange happened. They stayed, not with the warmth you'd always wanted from them, not with words or grand gestures. But they didn't leave, not fully. They hovered, checked in, watched, because deep down, they were trying to understand. What changed? How could the person who once needed them so deeply suddenly feel whole without them? They couldn't name it, but they could feel the shift. The power dynamic they'd hidden behind was gone, and in its place was something unfamiliar. Your peace. To the avoidant, love has always been safer when they're the ones controlling the distance. They learned early that being wanted can feel like being trapped, that intimacy can turn into dependency, that vulnerability can lead to disappointment. So they built walls, quiet ones you couldn't see at first. They gave just enough to keep you close, but never enough to feel truly held. And for a long time, you played along, not because you didn't notice, but because you loved them enough to hope that your consistency would eventually melt their fear. You believed that if you stayed steady, they'd one day trust that love wasn't something to run from. But what you didn't realize was that every time you overextended, every time you reached into their silence, you confirmed their hidden belief that they could have you, no matter how cold they became. So when you finally chose yourself, when you stopped reaching, it disrupted their entire nervous system. They didn't know how to process a version of you who wasn't orbiting their avoidance. They didn't understand that your withdrawal wasn't punishment. It was healing. It was you reclaiming the energy you had been bleeding into their distance. And that's when they started to stay. Because the avoidant doesn't always run when they lose interest. Sometimes they stay when they lose control. They become curious, restless, drawn to the very peace that once made them retreat. They'll tell themselves they just want to make sure you're okay. They'll linger in conversation, drop small messages, show signs of life. But underneath that is something deeper, a conflict they can't name. For the first time, they're drawn to what used to terrify them. Your independence, your ease, your detachment. It mirrors the very behavior they once used to keep you at a distance. But now it's you embodying it, and it makes them question everything. Because now, you're the one they can't read. You're the one with boundaries. You're the one who doesn't need them to stay. And paradoxically, that's what keeps them there. The avoidance stays when the emotional dynamic shifts, because it touches the one thing they can't admit, that deep down, they crave connection too. But this time, they can't access it the same way. Your energy no longer feeds their avoidance. Your love no longer cushions their fear. So they linger, half in, half out, hoping proximity might fix the ache. That distance used to numb. They may not say it out loud, but their actions will start to show it. They'll be more attentive, but only slightly. They'll test if the door is still open. They'll try to re-engage without surrendering control. It's subtle, but it's real. Because for the first time, you're not chasing, and they don't know how to feel safe in that. And here's the quiet truth. You choosing yourself isn't just self-love. It's a mirror. It reflects back to them everything they've been running from. The loneliness, the fear, the unmet need to belong. They used to manage that fear by staying emotionally one step ahead. Now, they're left face to face with it. They see you not as the one who overgave, but as the one who evolved. And that shift, it shakes them. Because if you can learn to find peace without them, what does that say about the stories they built their identity on? That love is danger. That closeness is suffocation. That detachment is power. For the first time, those stories start to crack. They stay because they're confused, because their usual exit strategy doesn't work anymore. They can't justify leaving a version of you who isn't demanding anything. They can't frame it as too much. They can't say you're overwhelming. You're simply there, calm, grounded, and whole. And that both draws them in and terrifies them, because now they're faced with a choice they've never had to make before: to stay not out of fear, but out of desire. And desire, for the avoidant, has always been the most dangerous thing of all. The conflict between wanting and withdrawing. When they decide to stay, it's not peace, it's war. Inside them, two worlds collide: one that longs for safety, for connection, for your warmth, and another that's terrified of what that safety costs. They want the feeling of being close, but not the vulnerability that comes with it. So even as they stay, they don't fully arrive. They linger in the doorway of their own heart, close enough to feel the warmth, far enough to still run. You'll notice it in the way they talk to you, in the tone that hovers between openness and defense. They'll ask how you're doing, but never how you're feeling. They'll want updates, but not depth, because depth, to them, is dangerous. Depth means exposure. Depth means being known, and being known was never safe where they learned love. So now, every moment of closeness triggers an invisible alarm, and yet they don't leave, because something in them is beginning to notice that your peace doesn't threaten them. It steadies them. They can sense it, even if they don't understand it, that your calm isn't a trap. It's an invitation. They start remembering what it felt like to be seen by you. Not the dramatic moments, not the fights, but the quiet ones, when your presence softened their walls. The way you used to look at them, without judgment. The way your voice lowered when they pulled away. The way you stayed, not to control, but to care. It used to overwhelm them. Now it haunts them, because that kind of safety, the kind they once feared, is the kind they secretly crave now. That it's gone. The avoidance heart doesn't harden overnight. It builds layers. Slowly, painfully, deliberately. They tell themselves stories like, "I'm better alone. People always disappoint me. No one really understands me." But those stories were never born from pride. They were born from pain, from being unseen. from being punished for feeling, from learning that needing was the same as losing. So now, when they stay, they do it in a way that doesn't risk too much. They stay through logic, through proximity, through the illusion of control, because their body still associates love with danger, and your peace disorients that system. Your detachment to them feels like unfamiliar kindness. You're not begging anymore. You're not chasing. You're not pleading for clarity. And that unsettles them, because before, they could define love by how much you needed them. Now, they're being asked to love without being needed, and they don't know how to love freely without control. That's new territory. It's not that they don't feel something. It's that they've never been safe enough to stay in it. You might see it in small moments. They hover around your peace, like someone testing cold water. A message here, a glance there, a quiet presence that never fully commits. But if you look closely, you'll see the hesitation isn't rejection. It's fear disguised as self-protection. They want to believe they can stay this time, that they can be close without losing themselves. But the avoidant nervous system is wired to equate love with engulfment. So when they feel you getting near, even in your calm, their instincts still whisper, run. And yet, they resist that whisper. For the first time, something holds them still. Maybe it's the quiet way you've reclaimed your power. Maybe it's how you no longer argue with their walls. Maybe it's how, instead of demanding connection, you've become it. You embody the emotional stability they've never known. You don't beg for peace. You are peace. And to them, that's confusing and magnetic. All at once, they start staying, not because they feel in control, but because something in them is tired of running. Still, they fight themselves constantly. One part of them says, this is safe. Another says, this is dangerous. This is love. This is a trap. They'll pull closer, then retreat, say they miss you, then disappear. It's not personal. It's survival. They're trying to rewire a system that was built to protect them from the very thing they now want to experience. And every time they try, it burns. Because connection isn't soft at first for the avoidant. It's electric. It jolts their nervous system like a shock of memory. All the moments of past rejection, all the times vulnerability led to loss, rush back. But this time, you're not the one trying to soothe them through it. You're simply standing there, calm, grounded, unmoved, holding space, but holding boundaries. And that's what teaches them that safety doesn't have to mean surrender. When they stay, they're not suddenly healed. They're testing new ground. They're watching you closely, not to control you, but to see if your peace is real, if you can love them without losing yourself, if they can love you without dissolving into fear. And when they realize you're no longer trying to fix them, something in them begins to thaw, slowly, quietly, unevenly, because the avoidant heart doesn't trust transformation. It trusts consistency. And your peace, your lack of urgency, your quiet strength, that's what begins to rewire them. Still, don't mistake their staying for readiness. Sometimes, the avoidant stays physically, but retreats emotionally. They'll mirror your detachment. They'll start acting unbothered because they want to prove they can handle the silence too. It's not manipulation. It's mimicry. They're trying to match your calm without understanding that your calm was born from healing, not suppression. So while they stay, they're still learning that stillness isn't the same as distance. They're learning that connection can exist without chaos. They're learning that love can survive without control. What keeps them near isn't what you once gave, it's who you've become. They used to feed off your overgiving. Now, they're drawn to your boundaries. Because those boundaries say something their heart has waited years to hear. You don't have to run to be safe. And slowly, they start to believe it, not through your words, but through your energy. Every time you choose yourself, instead of overextending, you show them what secure connection looks like. Every time you stay grounded, instead of reactive, you show them that peace doesn't mean rejection. Every time you stop chasing, you teach them that love can stay still and still be love. In your choosing yourself, you become the mirror that shows them what healing looks like. And though they may never admit it, you become the first person to stay calm while they unravel. You don't fight their silence. You don't chase their distance. You just exist in truth. And truth has a way of calling people home, even the ones who swore they'd never return. When detachment becomes the mirror they can't escape, they used to define power by distance, by how well they could withdraw without being pulled back, by how easily they could make silence feel like control. But now, that silence feels different because for the first time, you're not filling it. You're not chasing after it with words, explanations, or soft reassurances. You're just there, still, present, unapologetically grounded. And that stillness, it's not empty anymore. It's full of something they can't name, something that feels like truth. You see, avoidants run from emotion, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much and were never taught what to do with it. When you chose yourself, you interrupted that pattern. You stopped being the emotional sponge that absorbed their fear. You stopped letting their distance define your worth. And without that old dance, they have nowhere to hide. Because now, when they look at you, they see what peace looks like. And it's terrifying. For most of their life, love was chaos. It was unpredictability. It was survival. They learned to equate love with emotional exhaustion. To them, calm meant disinterest, space meant abandonment, and closeness meant danger. So when you stepped back, not out of anger, but out of clarity, it broke their template. You didn't leave in bitterness. You just stopped fighting, stopped proving, stopped explaining your love. And to them, that silence screams louder than any argument ever could, because now they're alone with what they tried to avoid all along themselves. They start replaying old moments, not to blame you, but to understand something they couldn't before. Why your love made them feel trapped, why your softness made them restless, why your patience felt unbearable. It wasn't that you were too much, it's that you were too safe. And safety, for someone who's known only survival, feels like danger in disguise. Their nervous system doesn't recognize calm, it mistrusts it. So when you gave them peace, they mistook it for boredom. When you gave them consistency, they mistook it for control. When you gave them love, they mistook it for loss. Now, with you detached, they begin to see the difference between peace and absence. Before, your silence used to mean punishment. Now, it feels like freedom, not the freedom they chased, the one that numbed them, but the kind that shows them how much of themselves they've been avoiding. Because when someone stops rescuing you, you finally have to face what you were running from. And that's what's happening to them. They miss the version of you that reached for them, not because they enjoyed hurting you, but because your reaching made them feel wanted. And wanted was the closest thing to worthy they'd ever felt. Now, you've stopped reaching, and they're left wondering how to feel wanted without being needed. That's the beginning of their inner collapse. Because avoidance often used being needed as proof they have value. When that need disappears, They start questioning their own emotional currency. Who are they, if not the one you chase? Who are they, if love no longer depends on their distance? You see, your detachment becomes their mirror, a reflection they can't escape, because your peace shows them every place they've been at war with themselves. They see how much of their control was actually fear, how much of their independence was actually avoidance, how much of their strength was just survival in disguise. And it's humbling, painful, raw, because no one tells you that for the avoidant. Healing feels like humiliation at first. They're forced to face how their pride was never protection, it was armor. And underneath that armor was a child, just begging to be safe enough to stay. They won't admit it right away. They'll mask it with indifference. They'll post things, say things, do things that make it seem like they've moved on. But emotional avoidance isn't absence of emotion, it's overregulation. They're not calm, they're suppressing. They're not unbothered, they're overwhelmed. They're not detached, they're drowning quietly, beneath control. And what's worse, for the first time, that control isn't working because you're no longer feeding it. Your detachment starves the dynamic. It stops the emotional chase. It removes the stage where their avoidance could perform. Now they're left with nothing to push against. And that's when reflection begins. They start noticing the silence between messages, the space that used to feel safe, now feels hollow. They start remembering the softness in your voice, the way your eyes would lower when you were tired of trying. They start realizing that your too much was actually effort, that your neediness was actually love asking to be met halfway. And it hits them. They didn't run from you. They ran from the parts of themselves that didn't know how to receive you. Avoidance often love in a way that looks like resistance. They'll say, I just need time. I'm not ready for something serious. I care about you, but I can't handle this right now. But underneath those phrases isn't indifference, it's grief. They grieve the part of themselves that wants to connect, but doesn't know how. They grieve the safety they never had, the love they couldn't hold, the intimacy they couldn't trust. So when you finally choose yourself, they're forced to face the space your love used to fill. And it's not empty, it's reflective. Every corner of that silence echoes with realization that maybe the love they said was too much was the exact love they weren't ready to receive. You see, healing doesn't begin when they come back. It begins when they stop running, even internally, when they start sitting with the discomfort instead of projecting it, when they start asking, why did I feel safer alone? Why did care feel like control? Why did I only feel powerful when I was pulling away? And those questions, they don't come easily. They come through insomnia, through overthinking, through moments of stillness that feel like punishment, because the avoidant has to learn to tolerate what they once fled: intimacy, vulnerability, truth. But here's the quiet beauty of your detachment: it doesn't teach them through pain, it teaches them through example. They see how your boundaries don't make you cold, they make you clear. They see how your peace doesn't make you detached, it makes you whole. And they begin to realize that love doesn't have to mean losing oneself, that maybe connection isn't something to control, but something to experience. And that realization is what keeps them near, even if they don't yet know how to say it. They stay, but differently now. Not because you're begging, not because they need to feel in power. They stay because something in them is finally curious. Curious about peace. Curious about love that doesn't demand survival. curious about how you healed, without their validation, because your growth is something they can't logic away. They can dismiss your words, but not your energy. They can argue with your perspective, but not with your transformation. You've become proof that connection and self-respect can exist in the same breath. And for someone who built their world on control, that's the most confronting mirror of all. What they feel now isn't longing in the romantic sense. It's recognition. They recognize the version of you who used to chase. They recognize the version of themselves who used to run. But they also recognize the new energy between you, something calmer, truer, and infinitely harder to manipulate. They sense that the power they used to hold no longer applies. And in that realization, they feel both loss and respect, because deep down, they always wanted to be met by someone strong enough not to disappear into them. And now, they finally have. When their guard starts to crack, but they pretend it doesn't. It doesn't happen all at once. The avoidant doesn't wake up one morning and say, "I'm ready for love now." No, it starts quietly, in moments they can't explain, moments that sneak up on them when they least expect it, like hearing your laugh in a crowd and feeling something soften, like reading an old message and realizing you weren't trying to control them. You were trying to connect, like scrolling past your name and feeling their chest tighten, not from loss, but from something that feels like truth. They won't call it longing. They'll call it nostalgia. They won't admit they miss you. They'll say they're just thinking. But the truth is, something's shifting. The walls they built to keep love out are starting to ache under their own weight. Because for the first time, their silence doesn't feel powerful anymore. It feels lonely. You see, avoidants live behind an invisible shield. They protect themselves from what they crave most: closeness, not because they don't want it, but because it once hurt to need it. So when they start to feel again, they panic. Their instinct isn't to reach out, it's to retreat. They'll get quiet, disappear for days, act busy, because their body doesn't yet know how to feel safe in wanting something real. But underneath the avoidance, a new awareness grows. They start noticing how your peace doesn't depend on them, how your voice, if they ever hear it again, carries calm instead of pleading, how your energy feels grounded instead of anxious. And that realization creates a crack in the armor, because they can feel the shift. They're no longer the center of your emotional weather. You're your own sun now, your own warmth, your own safety. And that's when the avoidance defense starts to lose its meaning. For years, they believed that love meant losing themselves, that needing someone meant weakness. But now, you've shown them another way, one that doesn't demand control or self-erasure. And it confuses them, because they can feel that what you have now isn't detachment, it's embodiment, peace, presence. You're not avoiding them. You're simply not abandoning yourself. And to someone who's only ever known love as a fight for attention, that's magnetic. They start checking in, subtly at first. A text that says, "Hey, how have you been?" A reaction to a story, a random memory dropped into your messages, like they're just being friendly. But every small gesture is them testing the temperature. Do you still care? Is it safe to come closer? Because deep down, they're terrified of what they'll find, that you've outgrown the version of them they once made you chase. And they're right. You have. But that's what makes your energy so healing to them now. You're not reaching out of emptiness anymore. You're responding out of fullness. They can feel the difference. Avoidants don't just run from people. They run from the mirror those people hold. And you were a mirror they couldn't handle, because you didn't reflect their control. You reflected their fear. You showed them what safety could look like. And safety, to them, felt unbearable. But now, after losing the one who stayed, they start realizing the problem was never your love. It was their capacity to receive it. They begin remembering details. How you used to breathe slower, when you were trying not to cry, how your words softened, right before you pulled away, how you still smiled, even when you were tired of proving your heart. And those memories aren't sentimental, they're grounding, because through them, they begin to feel again. Avoidants are masters of disconnection, but your absence forces them into emotional contact with their own humanity. They start to see that feelings don't kill them, they connect them. That vulnerability isn't exposure, it's access. Still, they resist. They'll convince themselves they're fine. They'll bury the ache under logic. They'll date other people, chasing distraction disguised as healing. But every surface level connection feels thinner now, because once you've tasted love, that meets your soul. Small talk feels like starvation, and the avoidant begins to realize they miss the depth they once tried to escape. They miss the calm they once misread as control. They miss the connection that didn't demand they perform. They miss the one who loved them without asking them to be perfect. But pride keeps them quiet. Avoidants don't confess easily, because to admit they miss you means admitting they were wrong, admitting they ran from something real. And that kind of accountability feels unbearable for someone who's built safety around avoidance. So they linger in the shadows. They stay around your energy, just close enough to feel safe, but not close enough to risk being seen. They'll stay watching, liking posts, checking stories, staying around, without ever saying the thing they want to say. I wasn't ready for someone like you. What they're learning, in silence, is that your peace didn't end the story. It began theirs. Because when you chose yourself, you planted a seed in their nervous system, a new association. That love doesn't have to mean chaos. That connection doesn't have to mean control. That boundaries don't end love. They protect it. And now, they feel something they never expected, a desire for stability, but not the kind that cages them, the kind that frees them. Your detachment became their teacher. Your absence became their mirror. Your peace became their permission. They'll start to test this new truth. Maybe they'll reach out. Maybe they'll stay silent, but begin to heal internally. Either way, you've already changed their blueprint. Because now, the kind of love they crave is the kind of love they once ran from. And that's growth. The kind that doesn't announce itself, but transforms quietly. In the background, they might not say it, but they feel it. That the one who stayed, then walked away with peace, was the one who showed them what real love looks like. Not the desperate kind, not the pleading kind, but the kind that chooses truth over fear. They're learning that connection isn't about control. It's about regulation, safety, presence, and that realization will follow them everywhere they go. Sometimes they'll still pull away. Healing isn't linear for them. They'll open up one day and go silent the next. But every time they try to retreat, they'll hear your voice in their mind. Not your literal voice, but the energy of it. That calm tone that said, I understand. That boundary that said, I won't chase you anymore. That truth that said, I love you, but I also love me. And those echoes will stay with them longer than any argument or plea ever could. Because love rooted in peace doesn't fade, it recalibrates. You became their mirror the day you stopped fighting for closeness and started choosing alignment. Because real healing doesn't always happen together. Sometimes it happens when one person rises and the other finally sees what rising looks like. Your detachment didn't destroy them, it woke them. It cracked open the space where healing could finally begin. And while they may not be ready to say it out loud, they know. They know who you were. They know what you gave. They know what they lost. And quietly, beneath all their defenses, they're learning how to stay. Not out of fear, not out of guilt, but because your peace showed them what home could feel like. When they finally realize what safety feels like, it happens quietly, not in a dramatic reunion, not in a text that says, I miss you. It happens in stillness, when the avoidant finally sits with their own silence and realizes it's not peace they feel anymore. It's absence, not the comfortable kind, the hollow kind, the kind that doesn't feel like safety anymore, the kind that feels like loss. They thought distance would save them. They thought logic would protect them. They thought independence meant freedom, but freedom without intimacy starts to feel like exile. And the avoidant, for the first time, feels the cost of their control, because control without connection isn't strength, it's survival. And survival isn't the same as living. They start noticing things, how conversations with others feel shallow, how no one really sees them, how the people they attract now either need too much or care too little. They crave something they once rejected: depth, consistency, emotional presence. But here's the irony: they can't fully access it without confronting the part of themselves that feared it. And that's why they stay. Not always physically. Sometimes it's energetic. Sometimes it's silent. But they stay because they know now that running from love was never the solution. Running from themselves was. They may reach out again one day, not with the same tone, not from fear, but from awareness. Their message might sound simple: hey, I've been thinking about you. But underneath that, what they're really saying is, I finally understand. I see what you were trying to show me. I feel what I couldn't feel back then. I get it now. But here's the thing: by the time they realize this, you've changed too. You no longer crave closure. You no longer wait for understanding. Because healing taught you that peace isn't something they give you, it's something you choose. You stopped needing their apology because you found your own forgiveness. You stopped waiting for their love because you became your own source. And that shift is what completes the story. You didn't just heal from the avoidant, you helped rewrite the pattern. Because every time someone like you refuses to chase, you teach someone like them that love doesn't have to feel unsafe. Every time you choose calm over chaos, you interrupt a generational cycle. Every time you say, I love you, but I choose me, you model what mature connection looks like. So no, they didn't stay because you begged. They stayed because your healing changed the atmosphere. You stopped speaking their old language and forced them to learn a new one: the language of self-respect, of patience, of grounded love. And one day, they might find themselves in a new connection, one that mirrors what you once offered. And when that person stays, instead of running, they'll finally understand what it feels like to be met by safety instead of chased by fear. And in that moment, they'll think of you, not with regret, but with gratitude, because your love wasn't a chapter they outgrew. It was the mirror that taught them who they could become. So if you ever wonder why they stayed longer than expected, why they lingered around your energy, even after pulling away, it's because your peace felt like home, the kind of home they never learned to trust until you showed them how. Love doesn't always end with a reunion. Sometimes it ends with recognition, recognition of the truth that love isn't meant to be earned through pain, pursuit, or proof. It's meant to be shared between two people who can finally stand still in their own wholeness. And if your story with the avoidant taught you anything, let it be this: you were never too much. You were just the first person to ask them to feel. And sometimes that's the most powerful thing you can be: a mirror that reflects what someone is finally ready to heal. So they stay, not because they're ready to love you again, but because they finally understand what real love asks of them: presence, truth, courage. And in their quiet way, they'll carry your lesson forward into every connection that follows. Because love like yours doesn't disappear, it becomes the standard, the reference, the awakening. And maybe that's what healing really is: not getting the ending you wanted, but becoming the peace you once begged someone else to give you. And in doing so, teaching even the avoidant what love was always meant to feel like.